Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. The Wuhan lab in China is back in international headlines, and how? After the US president announced a probe into the lab leak theory. British intelligence says it's quite feasible. A new study says that the virus has unique footprints and that it was created in a laboratory. Former US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the Chinese military was working with the Wuhan laboratory. The WHO says America should share what it knows. The clamor for evidence and answers is growing. China is trying to stonewall and discredit all such demands. But another investigation cannot be ruled out now. For more than a year, the world has employed a mix of patience and pressure to get China to cooperate and provide evidence. Now, with another push for a probe into the origins, what will be the shape of this conversation? Can these lab leak hypotheses be backed up by evidence? How much has China already whitewashed? These are questions that keep playing out in a loop, but we are glad that they're being asked again. The pandemic has killed millions of people the world over. The least we can demand is clarity on its origin. Also on the show tonight, Twitter brands posts as manipulated media. Tonight we'll tell you about manipulated social media, how Twitter controls conversations and restricts posts, how they won't let our stories reach you sometimes. Days after the 11-day war with Hamas, Israel is facing a political churn. Is Prime Minister Netanyahu ending his 12-year stint in office? Who will replace him? We'll discuss that. China has announced a 3-child policy to make up for its dwindling young population, but experts say it won't work. And did the US spy on its friends? Reports say Americans were aided by the Danish Secret Service to snoop on European leaders. What does America say? That's coming up ahead. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Recording a second straight quarter of expansion after witnessing a rare recession last year, India's GDP grew at 1.6% in the January to March quarter of the last fiscal. However, Asia's third-largest economy also witnessed a contraction of 7.3% for the entire year 2020 to 2021. Gunmen kidnapped scores of children from an Islamic seminary in central Nigeria's Niger state. The state government said on Twitter that some 200 children were at school at the time of the attack, adding that an unconfirmed number were taken. This abduction comes a day after 14 university students were freed after 40 days in captivity. A leading scientist advising that the government says that the United Kingdom is in the early stages of a third wave of coronavirus infections, adding that the variant first identified in India had fueled an exponential growth in cases. This casts doubt over the planned ending of COVID restrictions across England on June 21st, as experts call for a delay in lockdown easing. According to The Guardian, giant U.S. tech firms known as the Silicon Six have been accused of inflating their stated tax payments by almost $100 billion over the past decade. This as Chancellor Rishi Sunak called on world leaders to back a new tech tax ahead of next week's G7 summit in the UK. The Big Six includes the likes of Amazon, Facebook, Google's owner Alphabet, and Apple. Tokyo Olympics fans may have to be vaccinated or test negative for COVID-19 before being allowed into venues, according to a Japanese newspaper. Cheering, eating and drinking alcohol would also be banned, as organizers are set to decide in June how many spectators, if any, will be allowed to attend the games. Almost 400,000 people have been forced to leave the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo from city Goma due to fears of a new eruption by the nearby Mount Nyiragongo volcano, which killed 32 last week. The United Nations, which is relocating around half of its staff from Goma, reported 20,000 homeless and 40 missing in the volcano's aftermath. Vietnam plans to test all 9 million people for coronavirus in its largest city and imposed more restrictions to deal with the growing COVID-19 outbreak. People in Ho Chi Minh City are only allowed to leave home for essential activities. Public gatherings of more than 10 people are banned for the next 2 weeks. Hundreds of people were evacuated in New Zealand's Canterbury region as heavy rains raised water levels and caused widespread flooding. Local media reports said at least 300 homes in the region were evacuated overnight due to what is now being described as a 1-in-100 years deluge. Brooklyn Nets star Kyrie Irving has said that NBA fans in arenas have started treating players like they are in a human zoo. The 7-time All-Star had a water bottle thrown in his direction as he was leaving the court following victory over Boston Celtics in Game 4 of the playoffs. The fan in question had been arrested. In the last week alone, 5 fans have been handed bans for 3 separate instances of misbehavior with the players.
We begin tonight with some good news from India. Cases are falling steadily. On Sunday, India reported its lowest daily rise in 50 days. More than 150,000 people tested positive in a day, the lowest daily figure since the 9th of April. Active cases are just over 2 million for the last 7 days. India's positivity rate has remained below 10%, meaning less than 10 people in 100 who get themselves tested are found to be positive. More than 25 million Indians have recovered since last year. In the last 24 hours, over 230,000 people have recovered. And finally, there's a drop in fatalities too. Less than 3,500 people died on Sunday. This is India's lowest count since the 26th of April. The month of June could bring more good news for India. The vaccine rollout could receive a booster shot. Reports say India will have nearly 120 million doses in June. This is a major jump. In the month of May, India had around 79 million doses. In June, 120 million. It sounds like a good improvement. With infections falling, India needs to speed up vaccination. So far, 12.3% of Indians have got one shot. 3.3% have been fully vaccinated. Mass vaccination is the only way to beat the pandemic because the Wuhan virus is still mutating. A new strain has been found in Vietnam now. It's a mix of the variants detected in the United Kingdom and India. Vietnam has now ordered mass testing of risk groups. They believe this new variant is more contagious. So far, Vietnam has been successful in containing the outbreak. Since last year, it has registered not more than 7,000 cases and only 47 deaths. And a bulk of these 7,000 cases are from the second wave, which we're witnessing now, which is why the government has ordered mass testing and fresh lockdowns. The United Kingdom, meanwhile, is also reporting a spike. New cases have increased by 35%. Since last week, the UK has reported an average of more than 3,000 daily cases. So there definitely is a surge, but on the plus side, deaths in the UK have dropped by 19%. That's what you get with vaccination. Fewer fatalities. 58% of all Brits have got at least one shot. 58%. 37% have got both the doses. Moral of the story, vaccine is the only way to beat this virus. Meanwhile, the hunt for the origin of the virus has intensified. A question that we've been asking for more than a year now has suddenly become the top agenda of governments. Did the virus come from a lab? Is this a made-in-China pandemic? Investigations are on to find an answer to these questions. Last week, US President Joe Biden ordered an investigation. Now, the British intelligence agencies say the lab leak theory is plausible. It's feasible, they've said. Plus, there are new studies that claim that they have new evidence. Here's the latest one. It's a 22-page paper, parts of which were reported by a British news website over the weekend. What does it say? It says the Wuhan virus has, quote-unquote, no credible natural ancestor. In other words, the Wuhan virus is not natural in its origins. How do we know that? Apparently, the virus shows characteristics that it was manipulated in a laboratory. Now, here are the arguments presented in the paper. It says that this virus has some, quote-unquote, unique fingerprints. Here's how researchers explain this. The virus has a backbone of a natural coronavirus, the kind of coronavirus found in Chinese caves. So the basic structure of the Wuhan virus is natural, but the rest of it is altered. The virus has been spliced onto a new spike. Let's try to understand this. You must have seen images, digital recreations of the virus, like the one that you see on your screen right now. So there's a basic body, and then there are spikes, and they appear like a crown on the virus. They act like hooks, these spikes, and they bind the virus to a cell of the human body. Now, once the spike is hooked to your body, it opens a channel, and this is how the virus infects a human cell. So how was this virus made? The paper says it could have been the result of a gain-of-function research. Gain of function, we've been telling you about this for a while now. Gain of function involves modifying viruses. So you take a virus and you change it to make it more infectious. Essentially, you're creating dangerous variants of a virus in a laboratory. Why would anyone do it? Researchers say they do this to study the effect of these variants on the human body. But there's no telling how these viruses and altered viruses can then be used. There is a growing belief that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was conducting gain-of-function research into bat coronaviruses. This claim is at the center of this new investigation, or many investigations that are being conducted, where bat coronaviruses altered in the Wuhan lab. That is the question. And did they leak from there? It's hard to say for sure. There is still no evidence. These are, at best, theories. And this particular study has still not been published in full. This study was conducted by two researchers. One is British professor Angus Dalgleish. He teaches oncology in London. He was also a candidate for the UK Independence Party, or UKIP, in the 2015 parliamentary election. The second researcher is Norwegian scientist Dr. Birger Sorensen. Now, they made the first claim of a lab leak last year, but none of the major academics or journals have published their study. Why does it matter? Because that's how it works. For any scientific study to be taken seriously, it needs to be first published in a journal, and the work needs to be evaluated. This is called a peer review, which basically means an assessment of the validity, the quality, and the originality of the research. So this study from the UK must undergo more scrutiny. But the lab theory in general is getting a lot of support. After the US government, the British intelligence has backed it. They believe that a virus leak is, quote-unquote, feasible, and they're hunting for clues. This assessment was reported on Sunday. It led to a statement from the British vaccine minister. He has demanded a full investigation from the World Health Organization. Back in America, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has made fresh claims. He says that the Wuhan lab is engaged in military activity. Of what kind? He did not say that, but Pompeo believes that researchers in the Wuhan laboratory are working on something for the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese army, and there is a connection between this pandemic, the Wuhan lab, and the Chinese military. This is also something that we reported last year. China's top military virologist was sent to Wuhan. She was apparently on a mission to, quote-unquote, understand the virus. Chen Wei was deployed to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and reports say that Chen was there to develop treatments for patients. She later developed a vaccine too. The Chinese military has been taking a frontline role in medical research. Reports say that since 2015, the Chinese military has ramped up recruitment of scientists. Why does the PLA need scientists? It sees them as part of the strategy to modernize the military, as they put it. So Mike Pompeo's statement is significant. So are all the other assertions about the possibility of a lab leak. But how many of them can be proved? That's what it boils down to. How many of these claims can be backed by evidence? Experts say the United States must share what it knows. It must share the evidence it has. A health expert affiliated to the World Health Organization is the latest to make this demand. This is Dr. Dale Fisher. He chairs the Global Outbreak Alert Response Network. This is a network of more than 250 technical institutions. They track global outbreaks. Dr. Fisher says the possibility of a lab leak is quote-unquote not off the table. But it remains unverified. And he has urged the U.S. to share what it knows. In fact, this applies to all. The World Health Organization says it wants to reach out to member states and discuss any intelligence that is available.
We will be reaching out to member states in the way we normally would in order to seek their guidance as to whether there is further expertise available that could join with this international effort, especially in the next phase, where more specialist studies may be needed in order to further elucidate the origins of the virus.
America, Britain, WHO, independent researchers, they're all talking about the virus leaking from the Wuhan lab. The chorus has rattled China. It is relying on offense as the best form of defense. It is slinging mud, accusations and conspiracy theories on critics. Today, it called the growing demands for a probe a quote-unquote hidden political agenda.
However, some in the US, turning a blind eye to facts, science and the questionable study of origins and botched response at home, kept fabricating the lie that the virus was leaked from the Wuhan Institute of Virology and unreasonably asking China to pay for their own inaction. This shows that they don't care about the facts or truth and have zero interest in a serious science-based study of origins. Their aim is to use the pandemic to pursue stigmatization and political manipulation. They are being disrespectful to science, irresponsible to our lives, especially American lives, and counterproductive to concerted global efforts to fight the virus.
From victim to wolf, China has tried to play all, but the world continues to push for answers on the Wuhan lab. Last week, India joined the global push for a further investigation. This story, we say, has just begun. Twitter is restricting free speech, and we at WION have experienced it firsthand now. Something quite worrying happened this weekend, and I want to share all of this with you. I want you to know about it. Most of you are familiar with Gravitas Plus. It is our weekend digital edition where we cover issues ranging from politics to ancient history in short 10-minute videos. They're only broadcast on digital media. On Sunday, the 30th of May, we decided to raise the issue of women's reproductive freedom. At a time when women across the world are losing the rights over their own bodies, we thought it was imperative for a global network like ours to speak on behalf of millions of women and give voice to those who are fighting for the right to safe and legal abortion. So we put together a 10-minute video. We packed it with research, data, facts, and case studies. And we urged governments across the world to reconsider regressive laws, to give women the right to choice. Turns out our message never reached a lot of you in the audience. Why? Because Twitter apparently filtered us. What for? We don't know. On what basis? Again, no clue. Within minutes of the live stream, Twitter branded the video sensitive material. Look at this. Twitter also restricted our access to conversations around the video. WION social media team could not view quote tweets or tweet activity. Soon, the video was made unavailable on certain profiles and timelines. Now, this time, without any reason or sensitive material warning. Now, first things first, how does Twitter define sensitive material? And does abortion even qualify as sensitive material? This is the platform's policy, and it says Twitter groups sensitive media content under the following categories. Number one, graphic content, media that depicts death, violence, etc. Does a video on abortion qualify as graphic content? No, it does not. And I'm not saying this. Twitter is. In January 2020, Donald Trump's campaign posted a video on anti-abortion. Twitter tagged the video with a sensitive media warning. Soon the grain was reversed. Twitter said that it had made an error. Which are the other categories under which videos are branded sensitive? Category number 2, adult content, pornography, for example. Category number 3, violent sexual conduct. What falls under it? Rape or other forms of sexualized violence. Again, nothing to do with a conversation on abortion. Next category, gratuitous gore, gruesome content related to death, sadism, etc. Category number 5, hateful imagery such as the Nazi swastika. Clearly, an episode on abortion does not fall under any of these categories. So why has it been branded sensitive content? Why is Twitter restricting free speech? Why is it restricting the reach of credible content? Full disclosure, every episode of Gravitas Plus is watched by at least 50,000 people from across the world on Twitter alone. This is the average figure. Some episodes have been viewed more than 1 million times on Twitter. Like I said, it is a credible show, one that our global audience loves, especially because we take up issues that are otherwise ignored in the media space. And we were surprised last night when our episode on abortion did not see similar engagement. It just would not reach people. So we sent a mail to Twitter with screenshots duly attached. 12 hours on, there has been no reply. We then looked for answers on Twitter's policy pages. They were all headlined by well-tailored lines on freedom of speech. I have some of them. Defending and respecting the user's voice is one of our core values at Twitter. Here's another one. We do not block, limit or remove content based on an individual's views or opinions. Let the audience decide for themselves. But in the case of the abortion story, our message never reached the audience. Clearly, policy and practice were not adding up, and Twitter was silent. So we decided to speak to some experts. Apparently, Twitter often brands content as sensitive for reasons not listed in its policy. Now, these are reasons various and many, and often opaque. Jiten Jain, the director of a digital lab called Voyager InfoSec, told us, and I'm quoting, Twitter today is attempting to control global public discourse from a corporate boardroom. Its content moderation and censorship decisions are often opaque and smack of policy contradictions and double standards. Their content moderation decisions are often guided by political atmosphere rather than long-term policy and principles. Of course, the platform does not admit to any of this or thinks it necessary to offer an explanation. Just like our video on abortion, 12 hours on, no reply and more restrictions in case someone you are following has been lucky to access the video and has happened to retweet it. Many of you will still not be able to see it on your timeline. The post may still appear unavailable without any warning or explanation whatsoever. Why is this happening? Twitter's Help Center says it happens when content is quote-unquote not compliant with our policies. We may make it temporarily unavailable and require that the violator edit the media or information. Well, here's what we say. Twitter has no right to take editorial calls on content which is not even remotely sensitive, inflammatory or dangerous. This is blatant blocking of freedom of speech and expression. This is the same platform that back in December was writing long blogs on freedom of expression. And I must read out some lines as a reminder. We will continue to advocate for the right of free expression. We remain committed to safeguarding the health of the conversation occurring on Twitter and strongly believe that the tweets should flow. As we speak, Twitter has been wrangling with the government of India. Oh, what? Free speech again. Twitter is crying threat to free speech. Earlier this month it said, we will continue to be strictly guided by a commitment to protecting freedom of expression and privacy under the rule of law. Abortion, too, falls under freedom of expression, and you cannot restrict either. Social media was supposed to be the platform for unfiltered debates. Today, it has become the biggest hurdle. It is interfering with elections. It is muzzling and deplatforming leaders. In 2017, Twitter blocked a campaign ad of an American leader called Marsha Blackburn. She was announcing running for Senate, but the ad had a pro-life sentence favoring abortion. Blocked. In 2020, American lawmaker Matt Gaetz's pro-life tweet was blocked. And why just Twitter? Last year, Facebook branded Wyon's interview with a Chinese virologist as fake news. They branded her lab leak theory as fake and then partially fake. And today, the same so-called supposedly partially fake narrative is being pushed by the American president. Lab leak is being considered as a possible source of the Wuhan virus, and Facebook is happy to give it a platform. The point I'm making is very simple. Social media platforms cannot be allowed to play judge, jury, and executioner. This is social media manipulating content. This is big tech editing our conversations. They're shaping and controlling narratives and preaching to governments on how to uphold free speech. And talking about freedoms, China is notorious for curbing them. The Communist Party controls everything in China, from what you say to what you eat to how many children you have. From the late 1970s, China had a one-child policy, one child per family. They stuck with it for nearly 4 decades. But the one-child policy was a stopgap strategy. It would never have worked in the long run, and that's exactly what's happened. China's population is aging. It does not have young people to man its factories or join its army. Beijing's grand idea to solve this crisis is another flawed policy. The three-child policy. That's what they've come up with. Chinese couples are now allowed by the government to have 3 children. But here's the problem. People in China don't want a second child, let alone a third. Here's why.
How do you look at population? As mouths to feed? As hands in a factory? Or as men behind the trigger? For China, it's all of the above. In the late 1970s, population was China's ticking time bomb. There were too many mouths to feed. But instead of making more food, China purged population growth. They enacted the infamous one-child policy. It was like slapping a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Neither the economics nor the demography checked out. Decades later, this is the result. Look at the numbers. The median age has risen from 36 in 2015 to 38 in 2020. At this rate, it will be 40 years by 2025. Nearly 13.5% of the population is above 65 years. They need younger people to support them. But China wants all hands on deck. It needs more people manning the factories. So, what's the solution? A baby boom. In 2016, China announced a 2-child policy. No luck. Birth rates continued to plummet. So this time, Beijing has gone a step ahead. They have announced a 3-child policy. Some obvious flaws here. If couples don't want a second child, how and why will they think about a third? The Chinese need incentives to have bigger families. Right now, they have none. Chinese millennials put in 72 hours a week at work. Inflation is slowly eating into their savings. The housing market is too hot to touch. So a third child is simply not a practical choice for them.
The aging population is a social issue, but the social pressure for the young generation is even worse. After they give birth to children, the pressure is even greater in education and employment. It's a matter of personal choice.
Women in China have fought hard for this choice, but the state still looks at them as a demographic tool, one that can be regulated to suit their economic goals. With this 3-child policy, it promises to be more of the same.
It's mostly women bearing the responsibility of raising children, for the most part. And the society hasn't provided women with much support. So actually, if men could do more to raise the child, or if families could give more consideration for women who had just had children, actually a lot of women would be able to have a second child.
Conditions are not suitable for a baby boom in China, but Beijing doesn't just need workers, it needs triggermen. The Chinese army recruits hundreds of thousands of soldiers every year. The result of this multi-front aggression, more conflicts mean more soldiers. You cannot sustain the world's largest standing army with a falling birth rate. China's three-child policy is destined to fail. Beijing looks at its people and it sees numbers, statistics, not people with dreams and ambitions. And no amount of propaganda or coercion can change this. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The longest-serving Prime Minister in Israeli history is facing the biggest threat of his career. Will Benjamin Netanyahu be forced to step down? News channels and social media have been buzzing with reports. Just after the 11-day war with Hamas, what has triggered this political churn in Israel? Who is tipped to take Netanyahu's place? Is his exit a done deal? Let's try to understand. I'll start with the basics. Israel follows a parliamentary system of governance. The party with the greatest representation forms the government, and the leader of the winning party is made the prime minister. It sounds fairly simple. But in Israel, it is not. Call it strange or too much democracy, whatever you like, but no single party has ever won a clear majority in Israel's history. They've always had a coalition government. Political groups from various ideologies come together to form a government. But of late, these coalitions have been crumbling. Israel has witnessed 4 elections in 2 years. The last one was held in March 2021, and it produced a hung parliament. The numbers are on your screen. Neither the pro-Netanyahu right-wing bloc nor the ideologically diverse anti-Netanyahu bloc won enough seats to form a government. Out of the 120-odd seats in the Knesset, Netanyahu's party had only 30. This left 3 parties as kingmakers: the Joint List with 6 seats, the United Arab List with 4 seats, and Yamina with 7 seats. The deadline for Netanyahu to win their support was this month. He seems to have failed. Opposition parties are looking to build an alternative coalition and force the Prime Minister out of office. Leading these parties are 2 individuals. The first is the leader of Yamina, Naftali Bennett, an ultra-nationalist politician and a former ally of the Prime Minister. He has joined forces with Yair Lapid, a centrist opposition leader and the chairman of Yesh Atid, the second largest party in the Knesset. The 2 men have invited all political parties, irrespective of their ideology, to form a new and more diverse government of right-wing, centrist and left-wing parties. These parties that will apparently put Israel back on track. That's what they say. Listen to this.
Today I announced that I intend to do everything I can to form a national unity government together with my friend Yair Lapid, so that with God's help, we shall together rescue the state from the turbulence and put Israel back on track.
In a week's time, the state of Israel can have a new era. Suddenly there will be quiet. Ministers will go to work without inciting, lying or trying to instill us with fear all the time.
So where do things currently stand? Will these 2 men be able to unseat Netanyahu? It won't be so easy. It's still a fragile coalition. To form a government, they will need at least 33 more seats. Plus, the numbers would then have to vote in parliament to confirm this coalition. Anything could happen. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is already trying his best to ensure that this new coalition does not succeed. He says this coalition will form a left-wing government that would be a danger to the security of Israel, and that all those who were elected with right-wing votes must not deceive the public by voting in favor of the left wing. Exact words spoken. Watch this.
I call on those who were elected with the right-wing votes. I call on those who have a conscience to not form a left-wing government. Such a government will be a danger to the security of Israel and also a danger for the state's future. If you are from the right wing, you don't vote in favor of the left. And if you vote in favor of a left-wing government, you are not from the right wing. This is the simple truth. Act accordingly. Stand up against the left-wing government, and with God's help, we shall together form a right-wing government for the benefit of all Israelis.
Netanyahu clearly does not want to go without a fight. But how did things get here in the first place? A short answer could be the Israel-Palestine conflict. We just saw the 11-day conflict. 11 days of rocket fire between Gaza and Israel. The war ended on the 21st of May. The Prime Minister appeared to be more likely to hold on to power, but the lawmakers seem to have lost faith in him. They say that he failed in his promise of making peace with the Arab world and dented Israel's global standing. On the other hand, there's Netanyahu's image of invincibility. He's without doubt the greatest political survivor in Israel's history, having served as Prime Minister for a total of 15 years and counting. Of late, he's been testing the limits of his power, though. There are charges of bribery, fraud and breach of trust against him. They range from accepting cigars and bottles of sparkling wine from billionaires in exchange of favor to pushing favorable government policies for companies in exchange of positive press coverage. And to distract attention away from these charges, he's been using foreign policy to shore up support. That's the charge against him. Be it the normalization of ties with the Arab world, or the building of a wall at the border with Lebanon, or the conflict with Gaza. Netanyahu has constantly used foreign policy decisions to keep his support base intact, and the pendulum is slowly swinging in the other direction. The Israeli Prime Minister has been failing to secure a majority, and now his own allies are deserting him, threatening to form a new government. The Prime Minister may or may not survive this coming battle. But if there's one lesson that world leaders can learn from this political crisis, it is that foreign policy cannot always give a leader dividends on domestic issues. In 2013, a major scandal embarrassed the United States. It was caught spying on its friends. German Chancellor Angela Merkel was one of the targets. Now, a new report has revealed how America did it. The United States recruited Danish Secret Service to spy on not just Merkel, but a long list of top European officials. And this revelation could create fresh trouble for Joe Biden. Our next report tells you why.
Chancellor Angela Merkel, President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, and former opposition leader Peer Steinbrück. 7 years ago, these top German leaders were spied upon. Not by adversaries, but two friends. The United States and Denmark. Their intelligence services had struck up a partnership. A new report claims that the Danish military agency helped the US spy on Angela Merkel and the others, and they didn't stop there. The targets went beyond Germany. The American National Security Agency, or the NSA, used Danish spies on officials in Sweden, Norway and France. It's an embarrassment that America still hasn't been able to shake off. America was first caught spying on friends in 2013 during the Obama administration, when whistleblower Edward Snowden exposed the vast US surveillance operation. But now, this ghost has returned to haunt President Joe Biden, the leader who served as the vice president to Barack Obama. Snowden has revealed more secrets. In a tweet, he claimed that Biden was deeply involved in the scandal. Fresh reports suggest that the American NSA had access to everything. Data streams, text messages, even from chats and messaging services, telephone calls and internet searches. Considering the past, America's allies won't be happy to know that they were being snooped upon. But Berlin isn't saying much in public.
The federal government has taken note of the report and is in contact with all relevant national and international bodies for clarification. As a matter of principle, and you already know this, I would ask you to understand that the federal government does not openly comment on matters concerning intelligence activities. This is no statement whether a situation is applicable or not. The German government reports these issues to bodies of the parliament that meet confidentially.
But Sweden is angry with the United States. Sweden's defense minister wants Denmark to explain why it was spying for America. He wants Danish intelligence to reveal what they know about Swedish citizens and companies.
What Denmark has said so far is that they think that systematic wiretapping of a close ally or partner is unacceptable.
Both Denmark and the United States are silent on the revelations. Joe Biden, who is scheduled to travel to Europe in 2 weeks, hasn't said anything either. Since taking office, Biden has been trying to repair America's ties with Europe. A visit to the G7 summit in the United Kingdom was supposed to be a step towards rebuilding America's relationship with Europe. But now Biden could end up facing a hostile crowd. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Athletes in the media, it has always been a strained relationship. The players love it when the press praises them, but when things are not going so well, they prefer not to talk. But media commitments are legally binding nowadays, especially at major tournaments. If you skip them, there will be consequences. And that's exactly what happened to tennis star Naomi Osaka. She has decided to boycott the press to protect her mental health. Can athletes pick and choose their media engagements? And where does that leave the press corps? Because just like the players, they too are just doing their job.
Off his line, Havertz! Chelsea in front.
For the real sports fan, the game doesn't end with the final whistle. What about the players themselves? It can't be easy to relive a heart-wrenching loss in front of a frenzied press corps. For years, that's how it's been. Win or lose, you had to turn up. But tennis star Naomi Osaka disagrees.